Cool. Yeah, so we're just going to talk about ProMotion. We'll do a quick introduction about myself. My name is Tim, although a lot of people this year called me Tom. An unholy amount of people called me Tom. Don't know why. Don't know where that came from. Yeah, it says Tim in Japanese, but I have a few friends who know Japanese who corrected it for me and wrote the Japanese equivalent of Tom as well. Is that working? Nope, it's not working. I just hit the progress and it said lost Tim's phone. And I'll just do it from the phone. Can't find my phone. Can't find my MacBook. That's great. All right. Well, I tried. Okay. So this room is a bloody Faraday cage. All right. So I've been a fan of making iOS apps. Sorry, iPhone OS apps, as it was called, since the 3G back in good old 2008. Boy, they were different times. I've been attending the Perth iOS Meetup since 2011. So kudos to Sam for making it last this long. When did it start? Was it 2010, 2011? So kudos to Sam for that. It's been a really good, in terms of how quickly meetups turn over in Perth. This is really good. It's been going on for this long. I'm currently working for Realm. If you haven't heard from Realm today, the best example I could give is I got an email today. Someone said, "Hi, I was using Core Data and it drove me to tears. I'm trying Realm now." So it's basically Core Data with less tears. I definitely recommend it if you give it a try. The website's realm.io. This is not a sponsored meetup though, so that's the last I'll put on it. And as I say, my opinion is not that of my employers, etc. When I'm not doing Realm stuff, I really like to do my own open source libraries. So I do a lot of things like I made a crop view controller for iOS, and I've done a web view controller before SF Safari view controller came along. And the one I'm working on right now is I'm trying to completely recreate the lock screen from iOS just in time for it to be redesigned in iOS 11, I found out. So I really love doing UI code in iOS, and I love how buttery smooth the UI is. And yeah, that's a good lead into this talk. I'll also say something that's a bit controversial. I still prefer Objective-C. Swift is bloody brittle. I can't get my head around it sometimes. I managed to spend 2 hours one day trying to subclass UI button in Swift, and it didn't work. Everything optional. Yeah, everything optional, that'll work. I think so, yeah. But yeah, okay, so this is going to be a very waffly talk, I think, because there's not a lot to cover, but hopefully I can make it entertaining. We're going to be talking about ProMotion. So I'll do a quick introduction on what ProMotion is, what kind of APIs we can leverage with it, and then some implications that we get with this new technology that us developers need to be very much aware of. Do you want me to go back? Or? Okay, cool. So a few of us from Team Perth in this room, Sam, James, me, we managed to get the lovely golden ticket this year, and we were off to WWDC. It was not in San Francisco this time, it was in lovely San Jose. And we lined up for the traditional, what do we call that, the giant mass gathering for the keynote. It was really cool though, because I actually ran into a pile of developers from Japan who I met at the Try Swift conference, and they just whipped out the Nintendo Switches, and I didn't know Switches were they had their own version of AirDrop, so they just cracked out Mario Kart and played Mario Kart for 5 hours. It was amazing. So that was really good fun. But yeah, and we got into the keynote, and this guy's called Joz apparently. It's a nickname from Greg Joswiak. So Joz got up on stage and he dropped down the new iPad for us. Now we knew a new iPad was coming. We knew it was going to be a bit bigger, but that's probably all we knew about it. But what was really cool is, without any of us knowing about it, Joz announced ProMotion, a new technology for the new iPad Pro. So the question is, what is ProMotion? And basically, why should we care about it? So there's been a lot of iOS devices over the years. I tried to Google all of them, but it took a lot of effort just to compile that many pictures of iOS devices that were transparent. But yeah, we've had, I don't know how many iPhones now, at least 7, I guess, a pile of iPods and a ton of giant iPads. And the one thing they've all had in common, right from the iPhone original up to now, is they all operate at a screen refresh rate of 60 hertz. That leads to the question, why 60 hertz? So I did a bunch of research on why 60 hertz was a magic number. It seems to be this all overarching thing that computer screens, TVs, iOS devices, mobile devices, tablets, they all operate at 60 hertz. Now I was wondering, is this some magic number? I read this somewhere, it might have been fake news, I don't know, but I read somewhere that 60 hertz is a magical number that you need to fulfill if you want your users to feel like they're directly manipulating content on the screen. Like if it's less than 60 hertz, if you're dragging a finger across the glass, if it's not 60, it won't line up to their movements. It'll feel disjarring to them. Turns out that's not the case. Apparently 60 hertz is actually just a byproduct of a very antiquated technology. CRT screens, in America at least, it's different in Europe, they operate at a frequency of 60 hertz because that was the electrical frequency that the signal was provided to them, because if it was done at any other frequency, it would cause interference. So this is apparently just a byproduct of a very old technology. 60 hertz became the golden standard, and then as a result, when newer screens came in, they still stayed at 60 hertz, and up until now, it's just been 60 hertz, and that's what we've been used to it. The great thing about Apple is Apple doesn't stick to the mold, so they put it with 60 hertz for a while, but then they actually, as of this year, introduced ProMotion, which actually, work for it, runs at 120 hertz, double 60 hertz. So what does this look like exactly? Like the good old Steve used to say, I happen to have one right here. So the thing is, I wanted to show a demo on the projector, but my Mac can't do 120 hertz. The projector probably can't do 120 hertz. In fact, if they can do 60 hertz, I'll be amazed. So this is the kind of thing you have to see to believe. So if you haven't seen one yet, this is what the new iPad looks like, and this is what the refresh rate looks like. Buttery smooth. So this microphone is really sensitive, so if you want to say ooh and ah, then now's your chance. Ooh, thank you, Sam. Okay. So as you can see, very smooth compared to 60 hertz. And because we're in a Faraday cage, there's no pictures. Where's iComics? There you go. Here's a comic book. So as you can see, really nice, smooth transitions, really smooth animation. Where's Tweetbot? Tweetbot should have some cached information. They do. So I went back to my jumbo iPad after this, and it's at a measly 60 hertz, and I'm like, oh, it's so jerky. Oh, I can see the front. Yeah. Oh, the phone's not so bad. The phone is actually a lot smaller, so you don't really see it that much. But on big screens, it becomes really obvious. But as you can see, this is Tweetbot, and it's just really, really smooth. If you want, you can play with it later, but that's it. So really smooth. You can never look at another non-120 hertz iPad ever again once you've got one. I definitely recommend getting one. And yeah, I'll leave it here so you can have a play with it later if you want. That's basically it. But another cool thing about the ProMotion is what Joz mentioned was it's actually variable refresh rate. So up until now, I'm guessing most of the devices were at a flat 60. So no matter what you're doing, if nothing was moving on the screen, you are tied to 60 hertz, which is really inefficient if nothing's moving. But this one's really cool in the fact that some people pointed out 120 hertz actually divides into 24, the other way around I guess, 24 and 48 divide into it equally, which means you can scale the refresh rate down. So for example, if you're watching a movie, or movie at 48 hertz, or if you're watching a movie at 24 hertz or 24 frames, you now get, the refresh rate will scale down to that speed, so you're not wasting any battery life. It's really smart in the fact that I get the feeling this isn't even something we can control. Like the screen itself intelligently picks what refresh rate to work at. And then you can actually save a lot of battery power like that. And you even get things like proper alignment, because 60 does not divide into 24 properly. So you would actually get stuttering at some points because you get like frame overlap. At least that's what I read on the internet. So a chap who's in Melbourne, who apparently works for Itty Bitty Apps, very nice company if you haven't heard of them before. They make a great thing called Reveal App. Made this statement, and I definitely agree with him. 120 hertz is as significant as Retina was in 2010. So I think it got kind of downplayed this year to how important this is, but I think this is definitely like a new paradigm shift that we'll probably see in all iOS devices very soon. It's actually amazing that Apple brought it to the iPad before the iPhone. They never do that. The iPhone always gets the cool stuff first. But I think this is definitely a paradigm shift, and in a few years' time, we'll look on 60 hertz with as much disdain and disgust as we do as non-Retina displays at this point. So really quickly, I'll go through the API. There's actually...
Tim just put shade on everyone who's still running a non-Retina device.
Who's using a non-Retina device? Were you Android? My laptop. Oh no, sorry. Mobile devices, I meant. Yeah, like if you're using an iPhone 3GS or something like that. Yeah, no, you can. Yeah, no, like the Retina space in laptop in computer screens is still very up and down. Like we've got what 4K. Which is all right. You've got 5K, which requires specialized hardware. And then Dell, for some crazy reason, just released 8K because some people have money, I guess. But it takes like 2 display ports to run. Sorry?
3 whole extra Ks.
Yeah? It's 3 times better. So there's actually not a lot. Sorry, can I go back? There we go. There's actually not a lot. Like I did a bunch of scouring on the Apple website. The problem is ProMotion is such a generic word. I did a Google search for iPad ProMotion, and I got like 20 JB Hi-Fi pages about iPad promotions, and I went, this is a nice name and a silly name at the same time. But I finally managed to find this one small little technical note, what is it, TN, on the Apple website that talks about how to actually control these new things. So I'll go, if you want to look at it later, it's TN 2460. Like I said, it's really hard to Google for reasons. But I'll talk about the major points on it here. So, there you go. Metal. I was about to say, this slide isn't metal enough to have Federighi doing his thing. So support metal apps. If you're making a metal app, and I know there's a few game developers in Perth, so this is actually important, it's not on by default in iOS 10. So metal apps will still run at 60 Hertz until you actually set a specific flag in a plist to say, I want to run at 120 Hertz. And I actually talked to a few game developers today, and they were like, yeah, we got our game to barely run at 60, so the concept of running it at 120 is just like really terrifying, just because in terms of optimization. So apparently Apple wrote on that document that this is going to be only a thing for now, and in future versions of iOS, it will just run your software at 120. So for game developers at least, you need to be aware of this because it means that you will actually have to test your hardware test your game on this kind of hardware to make sure it works. Or otherwise, I'm guessing you can in the future you can re-enable this frame if you want your game to run at 60 Hertz instead. For UIKit, and yeah, I actually met Pete Steinberger, this WWDC. He's a lovely guy, and so passionate about UIKit. UIKit works out of the box, which is great. So as you saw there, most of those apps had not been updated for iOS for the new iPad yet. So it's just basically you download an app, it'll just run at 120 Hertz. You can actually query for this. There is an API they've exposed. They apparently exposed this for the Apple TV originally, I believe, because apparently when you plug an Apple TV into TVs, they can have variable refresh rates. So this was an existing API they've adapted to this new technology. But you can just check to see if you're running on a ProMotion screen or not via just checking if the maximum number of frames is above 60. There's obviously a lot of performance considerations, but I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a little bit. On that note, this isn't really ProMotion related, but it is kind of, give me a sec, is my thing still recording? Oh, it is, cool. There is actually a bit of this is kind of like a segue, but, speaking of segues, I'm supporting the new 10.5-inch iPad Pro. So it kind of works in iOS 10 for the most part. It works perfectly in iOS 11. So once iOS 11 comes out and it's shipped, everything will be fine, but until then we've got a few kinks to work out. So if you have a new iPad Pro 10.5-inch that runs iOS 10, your app will automatically scale to the new screen size if it has a launch storyboard and it allows split screen. So I make an app that doesn't allow split screen because I was crazy and I wrote it with two separate iPad and iPhone paths, so I can't easily adapt it. So what that means is a lot of apps out there still render at 1024 and then scale up on the new iPad because they've disabled split screen. So this is something to be aware of if you're making an iPad app and you have actually disabled split screen for any reason. There is a workaround. I did a bit of searching on Stack Overflow, and someone, I think it was Steve Charlton-Smith, or someone tweeted at Steve that there is actually a solution, but it's a terrible solution. You have to ditch the launch storyboard and go back to making specific launch images for every single freaking resolution. So back to the 2008 days of iOS development. You can actually apparently go into the plist and say like, this image is for this screen size, this image is for this screen size. If you explicitly say this launch image is for the screen size dictated by the 10.5-inch iPad, you can get the native resolution without using a launch storyboard and without needing to enable split screen. So yeah, this is heads up because that was kind of information that was buried away. But yeah, anyway, I guess the main thing is either wait for iOS 11 to come out or just enable split screen and try and fix as much as you can. Yes, what's your question, Sam?
Manually go through and export different size screen launch screens, or did you write a script that would allow you to do it repeatedly if your launch screen changes?
So I've the question just now was, did I write a script to manually do it, or did I just do it manually by hand? The answer right now is I did not. I have not done anything about it yet. So I'm still using I'm using a launch storyboard. I'm trying to think about what I should do. A script sounds like a good idea, or I could just make a blank image and just export it at different sizes and be done with it. Yeah, I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, but I'm going to have to do something about it because it doesn't look very nice on the 10.5-inch iPad.
I suggest spending 2 hours writing a script that's going to save you 5 minutes over the rest of your life.
You can use Fastlane. Fastlane's good. Wait, does Fastlane do launch images though?
You can do screenshots.
This is launch images though.
Yeah, but you can use those
You get like Photoshop. You can get Photoshop scripts.
Actually, it's a good point. Yeah, Photoshop Actions. We could write yeah. Yeah, there's ways around it. Or we could just wait for iOS 11, I guess.
Do nothing.
Just do nothing, let the problem fix itself and see if any users actually notice.
That's how problems go away.
Yeah, it's one way how problems go away. Cool. So there is another API you can actually use. You can't explicitly control the refresh rate of the new iPad Pro, but you can actually influence it. So there's an API in UIKit. I don't know has everyone heard of CA Display Link before? Sam has, Andy has. That's it. Matt has. Cool. Excellent. So if you haven't heard of CA Display Link before, it's an API that lets you actually align your animation, any custom animation code or motions with the refresh rate of the screen. So they added another API recently called preferred frames per second. And again, they did it under the guise of the Apple TV, but clearly it was for this thing. So you can actually say, like, I want to create a display link, the preferred frames per second rate of 24, and then when you add that to your main run loop, that will then get called every 24 frames. And you'll get a selector explicitly called that you can then use to execute your logic that will then update in sync with the refresh rate. And that should, look good. That being said, like I just said, iOS still decides the actual refresh rate. So if you've got other content on screen that's refreshing at different rates, the screen might decide to still keep it at 120, but this is the official way that you can use to influence the refresh rate of the screen. So there's a bunch of implications with this new technology, so I'd like to talk about. This is a thing I'm very passionate about, and I've talked about it in a few other talks, including TriSwift last year, where someone called me Tom accidentally, and I never heard the end of it. So up until now, iOS devices run at 60 hertz, like I said, or 60 frames per second. I know a few people say 60 FIPS. And basically that means if you're going to do any calculations, auto layout, new object allocation, setup, whatever, you need to do it within one frame, which on a 60 FIPS or FPS device is 16.6 recurring milliseconds. On the new one, on ProMotion, as you could probably guess, that's now been halved. So you have 120 frames per second, which means you now have a very luxurious 8.3 recurring milliseconds to do any of your processing. Now that being said, the chip in these new things is called the A10X, and it's an absolute powerhouse. I think it's possibly the first hexa-core CPU they've come out with. It's got 3 high-power cores for the major processing, 3 low-power cores for arbitrary, like low-level execution. It goes up to 2.38 gigahertz, I found out on the Wikipedia page, which is borderline my gaming PC from 2012, which terrifies me. And it's got 12 GPU cores. So this thing is obviously capable of doing some computations at a truly ludicrous speed. Sorry, I had to put that in there. But yeah, so I think for the most part, you're probably fine. But if you really want to make sure that your apps, the ones you're working on right now, work at 120 frames, clearly you need to make sure to test all the things. And there's no way around it. If you're going to test all the things, you probably should buy your own hardware. So if you need help, there's a something button on the Apple website where if you press it, an iPad Pro will come to your house. It's amazing. But yeah, so in any case, this is clearly a thing that we need to think about now, because something that might have been acceptable at 16 milliseconds might not be acceptable at 8 milliseconds, even if you have got much more processing power. So like I always say, never like try and just jump in and assume what's causing the bottleneck. Instruments is your friend. Always use instruments. It keeps freaking changing of every Xcode version, so now I have no idea where the buttons are, so I'd have to relearn it. Thankfully, every WWDC they do a talk about what's changed in instruments, so you can go in there and hopefully they'll tell you where all the buttons have gone.
Like the thing down the bottom.
Yep, the thing down the bottom.
Yes,
yeah?
the blue one. You have to click on that now.
What, the call tree button? Wait, what?
If you want to revert the call stack, you have to click on that blue
Oh yeah, oh, is that where it works? It used to be up there, and I was like, okay. Wait. I was like, where are my buttons going? How do I just collapse it to only the function calls I'm in charge of and stuff like that? Sorry?
Instruments are now called flops.
Flops. Oh well, thanks Apple. Another thing, I don't know, everyone probably noticed this last year, but Apple actually did some huge refinements to UI collection view and UI table view. It's kind of automatic behavior now, but they actually made it really intelligent in that if you've got a row of cells coming up, back in the old days, it would try and lay out every cell in one iteration of the run loop, which meant that if you had like 6 cells being set up, that would be a huge performance hit and you'd notice the drop frames. So now, intelligently, UI collection view will break that allocation of cell, like that setup of cells across multiple run loops, which means that for the most part, you get a nice implicit performance boost without having to do anything. But that being said, there are additional methods in the delegate they are provided that you can actually use to get some more information about how to preload data to be set up for the cells. So as long as you've built your app for iOS 10 and above, you'll get most of that behavior implicitly. But I definitely recommend watching this video, which is session 219 of last year, because they talk about how the extra delegate methods work and how you can actually go ahead and preemptively prepare data, which means that by the time it comes on the screen, it's all ready to go. And hopefully that means that you'll get a much nicer a much smoother experience without needing to spend too much effort working on it. Another thing, we talked about this in the iOS Slack a little while ago, graphics performance is a big thing. With 12 GPU cores, I don't think graphics is a huge issue for 2D UIKit apps, unless you're doing something really, really wrong. But something I always like to talk about is if your layers don't need, or if your views don't need transparency, you should turn transparency off. So you can look at this in the simulator or a real device via instruments. But you can turn color blended layers on. If it's red, that means it's being composited, which means it has to go through an initial pass to work out what elements are transparent. So this is actually one of my own libraries, and even still, like I could probably make that even more optimized. Like the section headers are red there, but they don't need to be because the color behind them never changes. They could be the same color, background color as the table view, and it would look exactly the same, but there'd be less computations on the GPU's behalf. This is kind of hard to profile because obviously this is not CPU bound, this is all GPU bound. So the kind of thing here is try and profile as much as you can. Always do a check to see what's happening on your device to see if there are like layers being blended that shouldn't be blended. There's also other things you can do, like if you look at copied images, misaligned images, and off-screen rendered, they also incur a bit of a hit, no matter what they are. So if you can minimize all that, that really helps. But there's tons and tons of Apple talks and WWDC talks about all of this, so you should definitely look at them. And I really recommend that, because that's GPU bound, so that's not something you can effectively control or profile very easily. Dave DeLong's so cool, isn't he? And no one says bow ties are cool anymore for some reason. What happened?
Sorry, guy wearing
You, doctor.
Sandals.
What? Jandals?
I was thinking about New Zealand.
Oh, okay. Sandals. Who?
Who?
Wait, someone wore sandals on one of the Apple engineers?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, rocking it. So another thing you can think of is if you've still got a bottleneck happening because whatever you're doing is longer than 8 milliseconds, one thing you can definitely consider, it's something you should do as a last resort, because obviously threaded code is tricky, is you should just start looking at ways to offload that work to a separate thread and then come back when it's done. NS operation is the best one. It's the most highest level one. Sorry, it's called operation in Swift now, isn't it? Yeah, that's tricky. So that one's really good for really complex operations. Dave DeLong did a really good talk at WWDC last year talking about some of the other advantages of NS operations, because you can do things like you can chain operations. So it's a really good way to encapsulate logic and keep it really modular. Yeah? Oh, yeah, yep. Yeah, so you can't. Yeah.
GCD doesn't have any sort of concept of cancellation in the implementing itself, but NS operation
Yeah.
is good. So, yeah, it's pretty good for that.
Yeah, so NS operation is based off GCD, but it adds a lot of like convenience functionality. Like you can basically, you can't explicitly cancel a thread and the app will terminate it. You have to, in your own logic, check if it's been cancelled, and then if it's been cancelled, you exit the logic yourself. That being said, GCD is also great if you want like really granular control. If you want to do things like create thread-safe accesses, like it's overkill to use NS operations for that. So GCD is also a very valuable thing to know about when you're making iOS apps. There's obviously tons and tons of WWDC videos talking about GCD, and I was actually trying to figure out how to do thread-safe accesses recently, and I did a quick Google, and Ray Wendlick has an absolute goldmine of GCD-related tutorials. So these things are really good things to check out. Auto layout is another thing. I'm kind of, yeah, I don't get auto layout either. It's it feels like it's a lot of effort for a little less trade-off, but it depends if you're using any libraries with it, I guess. The problem with auto layout though is it might save you some time up front, but the calculations are performed on the main thread by default. So for the most part, that's fine, but when you start having tons and tons of constraints, or if a constraint is missing or broken, that will slow down the calculation. So suddenly you might actually start experiencing frame drops because auto layout's taking too long to figure out how to lay out the content. As a result, I still think springs and struts have a place. Like if something, thank you, James. Springs, like if you're just doing like this view matches the width of this view, you don't need to worry about same auto layout constraints. Because of their very simple nature, springs and struts have very high performance. So if you can get away with springs and struts, I recommend that.
They worked for us in 1986.
They've been what? They've been around that long?
They would date back to the start of Interface Builder.
When did Interface Builder start? 1986? That's when I was born. That's a long time ago. About what, hugging in resistance?
Yeah, like you might have a group of controls.
Yep.
Depending on the content might come down from the API.
Yep.
Depending on how long the strings are and they've got a wrap.
Well, well, yeah, like auto layout's more intelligent than strings and struts, and that's a case where auto layout would be useful because you have a value that's going to be calculated at that time, and then you calculate layout off that. But that's a good segue into the next thing I'm talking about. Has anyone here heard of async display kit before? Sam has. That's it. Okay. It's actually not called async display kit anymore. It's now called texture, which is interesting.
Does it have a cool logo as well?
I don't know.
That cool logo is the way you judge whether they're any good.
It had a cool logo for async display kit. It was like a square bracket that turned into normal brackets. I don't know if they kept that for texture, but it has a logo. Like I got a sticker with it at one point. So async display kit, or now texture, I guess, it was originally a library created by Facebook for their own apps. It's a blend of Objective-C and Objective-C++, so it's the craziness. And somehow Pinterest, like I guess Facebook got sick of it or something, but Pinterest inherited it. It was interesting. It was an interesting exchange. But now, as with the rebrand to texture, Pinterest has said they're not technically owning it. They've given it to the community, and now everyone can contribute to it. But Pinterest is kind of still looking after it. And it's interesting in the fact that they kind of expand the concept of how UI views are basically an abstraction over CA layers for giving more features to CA layers. Does everyone know what a CA layer is? Yep. So UI view controls CA layer, or like it basically, yeah, it adds more function to CA layer. So what they've done is they add a third layer of layering to the CA layer. It's really confusing, called nodes. So they actually basically create a node version of every single iOS UI control. So there's like AS collection node and AS table node as opposed to UI table view and UI collection view. And the idea is, it's actually pretty awesome. The node takes care of all the layout calculations, all the auto layout stuff, and even intelligently guesses when you need content, and completely manages doing that asynchronously, which is really cool. So the best example of this is the home screen of the Pinterest app, because you've got this giant scroll view of all these images being loaded down. That's being backed by a texture. And it's really cool in the fact that as you're scrolling down, it actually goes to this intelligent, like, okay, these cells are coming up, start doing the requests for the thumbnails for this one. These ones are about to come on screen, start calculating the constraints. These ones are on screen, so these get priority. So it's really cool in the fact that it's a pile of code that the end goal is 60 frames or 120 frames. Like that, basically, it's really cool seeing it in action because the Pinterest app runs at 60 frames on even the oldest iPod Touch I have, and it's kind of mind-blowing because it basically does all of the calculations you need automatically and on a background thread manages that all for you. So I'm really excited about this, clearly because it means you get buttery smooth scrolling basically for free.
Is it usable from Swift yet?
I think it's usable from Swift. I knew that question was coming up.
Is it view model based or does it use callbacks? You have to like populate it.
I think it's like callback based, like delegates. Like it uses delegates. So it says like, okay, this cell is about to come on screen. What do you want me to do? Do I have to start downloading some thumbnails or something like that? I haven't actually played it too much. It's a very big library. It's very easy to find. The website's texturegroup.org. I definitely recommend checking it out because it does make really smooth scrolling very easy. And I actually went to the Pinterest when I was in America last year in December, and I went for why did I go? Oh, that's right. They were promising free beer. So I went there and actually talked to them. This is before it was renamed to Texture. They were talking about how they just created a new major release. I think it was version 2 or something. So they were talking about the whole concept. I think that talk's online somewhere. They talk about the motivation behind texture or async display kit. and they introduced the concept of the node layer over the view layer. It's definitely worth checking out. But like I said, I think I've mentioned this in the Slack before. If you ever have any questions, everyone here's in the Slack, right? You haven't joined yet? You haven't joined yet? You in it, Matt? Oh, okay. Cool. Sorry? What are you talking about? What? Anyway.
It looks like I'm the only one that talks on there.
Yeah. Well, you do talk a lot.
So it's actually a great example of the sort of collaboration.
Well, it's very well maintained by Sam. This Slack's really good, and obviously we have a lot of channels where people can ask questions. You can ask about Swift or backend. I like to complain about Swift sometimes in the Swift channel. But if you have any questions, or if you don't want to spend the money to buy a new iPad, I'm happy to if you want to give me a test flight invite, I'll test it for you if you want. And yeah, if you want, we hang out in here. If you have any questions, we can always help you in here. So if you're not a member of the
Ranting is encouraged.
ranting is encouraged, cool. What about Giphy use? Is Giphy use encouraged?
Yes.
Okay, cool. That's good. That's my contribution.
Just me and you online.
So what was that?
Just you and I online there.
I know. Actually, I noticed that. Yeah, I was like, I'm gonna take a photo of this. I was gonna try and hide that to make it more generic, but yeah. Sorry? What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
Oh, snap.
I test Giphies. Yeah, that's my Giphy scratch board.
I sent myself a link to
Yeah,
every one.
Yeah. Like,
When I test Markdown,
yeah, Markdown testing is another good one. Yeah, well,
Everyone messages themselves.
well, yeah. So you don't make an ass of yourself.
Now everyone has an excuse for messaging themselves.
Cool. Anyway, so that's the talk, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Thanks a lot for coming. It's good to be back. Go make something awesome. And any questions? How do you get texture? It's GitHub. It's I think I can't check because I have no Wi-Fi. I think it's just github.com/texture/texture. But of course. Yeah, if you just do a search, the website is texturegroup.org. They've got a bunch of videos, a bunch of tutorials, and a bunch of documentation on that one. So that was the one to check.
It looks very powerful. I remember when it first came out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I remember hearing about it too, but it terrified me. Like, it was so much code. I was like, I don't know how to just drop this into an app. I don't know about this, but
Does anyone know why Facebook ditched it?
I think,
a lot of things.
yeah, I think Facebook were just like, we're not going to work with this anymore. I think they've gravitated mainly towards React Native,
I heard
but I completely made that up.
moving away from React Native.
What? They're moving away from React Native? You heard that? Why would they do that?
This is what Facebook does. They're like, hey,
Well, so they're worse than Google in terms of just, yeah.
Facebook they weren't using React Native very much in the core Facebook app. Just
Okay.
because the JSC at the startup cost was too severe.
Yeah. I always heard I thought they were using it in Instagram, but Instagram's doing their own thing of IG List Kit right now. So